l'ennemi nous attaque.
This is Enaa in With You the Fight Back, and today I'd like to talk about Trotsky's program of the left opposition in the 1920s. Too often Trotsky's program just gets seen as a precursor of Stalin's, and I'd like to actually show that is not quite the case. In fact, Trotsky's program is considerably different. And to begin with, Trotsky's formulating his ideas in the position of an isolated and devastated Soviet Union after the Civil War that is engaged in the period of the new economic policy. Industry is kind of lagging along, and by the end of the 20s it will reach the level it had possessed of output from before World War I, and agriculture probably just about barely. So there's a lot of problems. The leaders of the Soviet Union are not quite sure which way to go for development and socialism, and there's a lot of debate in the party, the primary antagonists being Leon Trotsky of the left opposition, Nikolai Bukharin of the right opposition, and Joseph Stalin. Anyway, we have Trotsky's basing his ideas on the problem of the scissors crisis. And this is where industry, since it's so undeveloped, since it's so devastated, it's charging high prices for its goods, tractors, fertilizer, whatever it is. So peasants, who make up most of the population, they have to pay high prices. But since agriculture is so plentiful, there's low prices for agricultural goods. So the peasantry is really not getting much out of this. And Trotsky believes that the scissors crisis is due to the root cause of the backwardness of industry. And he's hoping to speed up the rate of industrialization, and he wants some kind of planning to do this. And in this hope is that more industry would mean more production of cheaper goods for the peasantry, which would strengthen the worker-peasant alliance, which was kind of shaky after the Civil War. And he hopes that this would help maintain the socialist character of the state done through industry. And if you're providing cheap goods to the peasants, like fertilizer, tractors, and whatnot, that this would provide a technical base for a later leap into collectivization. So, again, reducing the scissors. And he wants, in this sense, he wants industry to adapt to the needs of the royal economy, but at the same time he wants this done vice versa. And he's afraid that if you don't speed up the rate of industrialization, that there's a fear of a crisis, that the worker-peasant alliance will be threatened by this scissors crisis. And Trotsky's also worried about class stratification in the countryside, and he's hoping that the growth of industry could not only forestall this, but it could eventually nullify it. And he's attributing a lot of this to the shortage of industrial goods. But he does believe, because the peasantry is making up so much of the population, and because industry is so essential to future socialist development, that the peasantry needs to be taxed for some of this. And again, Trotsky pretty much wants most of this burden to fall on the wealthier peasants. And he also expects the workers to make sacrifices for future industrial development. And Trotsky has boundless faith in the proletariat to do this, but he thinks they'll only respond if the state is democratic and the workers perceive that they're in control. But he's fearing at the same time that the party is becoming rapidly in control of a fossilized bureaucracy that is separating itself from the workers and taking more the side of the kulaks, the rich peasants, and administrators and managers. Although Trotsky and pretty much the rest of the Soviet leaders were vocal that collective agriculture would be superior to private plots, Trotsky expected that private plots would exist for some time to come. And he did not advocate in any way the use of force to bring about collectivization. To him it was unthinkable. He wanted to use methods of persuasion and concessions to the peasantry. And this, of course, would not be how collectivization was actually carried out. At the same time, Trotsky does not accept the premise of socialism in one country. Russia cannot survive in conditions of isolation, and it needs a successful revolution in the West, which would definitely help to provide industry and support to the Soviet regime. And although Trotsky is not calling for the mass executions of kulaks, his method of dealing with the rise of rich peasants is primarily through economic and physical measures, taxing, not the mass executions we would later see under Stalin. And Trotsky and other left opposition leaders believed that the initial period of industrialization, what some on the left opposition call primitive socialist accumulation, perhaps a poor choice of words maybe, that this would be a stage of tension with the worker-peasant alliance because of the taxation and the sacrifices that be demanded of the workers and peasants. It was hoped that the Soviet government, the Soviet society would pass through this stage fairly quickly. And Trotsky is also hoping that industrialization would eventually not only bring concessions to the peasantry, but it bring increased wages and lower prices and increased productivity for industry, which would benefit the working class and society in general. And Trotsky was pretty adamant that collectivization would come when you had an adequate technical base. You really can't have collective farms without the massive numbers of tractors and other goods that would be needed. And unfortunately, Stalinist planning was later so haphazard and so lopsided to heavy industry that collective farms were often at a very primitive state of development and didn't have the modern methods that they would need. Trotsky also urged for agricultural cooperation along the lines of Lenin and the granting of long-term credits to the poor peasantry. And a lot of this, at the same time, they're also advocating for a lot of the poor peasantry and the middle peasantry as well to take a lot of the initiative. And again, any change in agriculture was seen as preconditioned by the development of industrialization. And collectivization, again, was a long-term gradual process. And Trotsky wanted to, at the same time, improve the lot of the proletariat. Again, unions were not really protecting the workers. The state was becoming separated from them on the side of the bureaucracy. And Trotsky wants to democratize the state, the party, the Soviets, and the unions. And he's, at the same time, on the international sphere, he's criticizing the Soviet government and the Comintern for its facilitating policies in places particularly as China and England, which had led to revolutionary setbacks and endangered socialism at home. And later on, Trotsky's views on the Soviet bureaucracy would be developed in The Revolution Betrayed, published in the 1930s. And this would be his mature view. But this is a rather reforming measure that Trotsky was advocating in the 20s. And although Trotsky did not think socialism could be successfully developed in conditions of isolation, he did actually have a program for this period of isolation. And it should be noted. Some of the sources I consulted are in the credits, but Moshe Levin's work, Victor Serge, Trotsky's of course, and Isaac Deutscher's Prophet Enaa. This is Enaa in with you in the Fight Back. Until next time.